Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah daf Kafav. Today's daf is sponsored by Gudi and Eric Weil in loving memory of the beloved Rav Dov Shabtai ben Yehoshua Lev and Ethel Greenstone. After a short illness, he inspired many of the women and men of his family to learn daf Yomi, and many are part of the Hadran community that embraces them today and learns in his honor. Yehi Zichro Baruch. That's 3 in a row dedications for the same person. You can see the impact he clearly had on daf Yomi and our learners. Okay, we are going to get started with where we were up to. So first, I just want to remind you, we're in the middle of a long Mishna, which had all sorts of examples of relationships between particular people and whether or not the woman would be able to drink the Sotah waters or not. And then we got to the second part, which all this we're going to relate to today, which is for what men can or can't the husband warn her about being in a room with. Okay, so that was the first issue was the relationship between the husband and the wife, and who the husband is or who the wife is. The second issue was who the person she's suspected of being with can or can't be. So now we're up to the part about the aylonit. There were 3 types of women in aylonit. A woman who can't have children for some other reason, which seemed right. Now, aylonit is someone who never reached the age of maturity in terms of physical maturity. Her body never got to that point where she could theoretically have a child. And that's the whole issue here, why she is excluded. And she's a little bit different from a skena or the, trying to remember, they called it an akara, which is a woman who could have had children, but then at a certain point, something happened and she can no longer have children. Whereas Kena, who just got too old. So a man who's never had children before is not supposed to marry one of these women, according to Tanakama, and therefore, since he's not supposed to marry them, she basically does not drink Sotah waters if they do get married and he suspects her. According to Rabbi Elazar, though, of course he can marry them because he can always marry another wife in order to have children. It doesn't prevent him from having children. So therefore, she's his wife, and therefore she drinks the Sotah waters. But comes Rav Nachman and says, wait a minute, in the name of Rabbi Baravua, and says, this machloka between Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis is only about the akara and the skena. But for sure, the aylonit, even Rabbi Elazar would agree, even though theoretically they could be married, still she doesn't drink the Sotah waters. And that's because of a verse toward the end of the section, which says, if the woman is not impure, meaning after she drinks the Sotah waters, and it's proven that she didn't do anything with that man, well, it says, Torah, she's pure, v'nikta v'nizra'a zer. So she's then clean, so to speak. Okay, it's a little hard how to translate that word. V'nizra'a zera. And then what it really means literally is she gets pregnant. That's like a bracha that happens to this woman who went through the process and is actually innocent. So comes Rav Nachman and says, from that pasuk, or Rabbi Baravua really, quoted by Rav Nachman, that pasuk is obviously adding something else. Why, I'm not sure. Maybe because of the double language of nizra'a zera, and it could have said it simpler. So he darshans it and says, from there that excludes the aylonit who never had potential to have zera. It has to be a woman who, at least, even though now she can't get pregnant, but theoretically she could have at some point in her life. So now the Gemara says, we have a problem with this from a braita, because there's a braita that contradicts. Okay, and basically says that the aylonit could drink the Sotah waters, according to Rabbi Elazar. So to get there, we're going to have a very long braita. We started with Hamikanela Arusato l'shomer yabam shelo. So if a man does kinui, warrants his wife when they're only betrothed, or she's waiting to do yibum with him, we already learned this in our Mishna, same thing. If she hasn't yet married him, he hasn't married her yet, and she's already been in the room alone with the man, he wants to bring her as a Sotah, he can't do that because we already learned they have to be married first. Okay, so therefore, lo shotah, lo notel ketubata. She doesn't drink the waters, but because she did this, she also doesn't get her ketubah. Me'uberet chavero, now starting at the top of Kafav. We're going to just go through case by case, only at the very end we're going to get to the aylonit, which is the only reason why we brought this. So this is a braita. It appears in the Tosefta with minor variations. So you could say maybe it's from the Tosefta quoted differently, or it's just a braita that's very similar to the Tosefta. Me'uberet chavero meneket chavero. Remember this is a woman who marries, who's pregnant or nursing when her husband dies or divorces her, and she marries somebody else during that time period, where there's therefore going to be a danger to her son. and she's not supposed to marry him because of that, or danger to her daughter, because she won't be able to nurse them, because the new husband might want to get her pregnant right away, and therefore, or might anyway, whether he wants to or not, and that will basically cause the life of her baby to be in danger, because her milk will dry up, right? Again, they didn't have formula in those days, and maybe they couldn't afford to hire a nursemaid, right? Maybe he wouldn't be willing to spend money on a nursemaid. And remember, women don't often have their own money. So it's actually forbidden, even though this sounds like a crazy situation, to forbid a marriage like that. Lo shotot v'lo notot ketubah. So since it's a forbidden marriage, they don't drink, but they also don't get their ketubah money. If they are in that relationship, hidi kinui, and she was nistira in the room with the man, and she would then lose her ketubah money. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Shaya Rabbi Meir Omer. Why did Rabbi Meir say this? Because he held lo yisa adam uberet chavero menechet chavero. You're not allowed to do this. V'im nasa. Not only did he forbid it, but he held, very interestingly, im nasa yotzi. If he does it, he has to divorce her. Below yachzir aylonit. He has a very strict approach to this. He says, even though theoretically, and we talked about this before, this is something that is forbidden now, but theoretically over time, right? As soon as the baby is 24 months and there's no nursing anymore, nursing mothers in the Gemara are always considered up to 2 years. After that, theoretically, you could stay married to her. Well, Rabbi Meir said, but you went against what the rabbi said, and we're penalizing you, and you can never marry this woman again. The rabbis say, no, divorce her now. But as soon as the child's 24 months, you can go remarry her, no problem. So it seems like the rabbis might say that because of that, there's a law of Sotah here, because it's only temporary, it's not permanent. As opposed to, let's say, the widow and the kohen gadol, right? Or the divorcee and the regular kohen. And the mamzer and the Yisrael, right? All those cases we see. Braita continues. V'haroveh, which is a young person, okay, a young man, shenasa akara uzkena. So they probably say young person because the point is he doesn't have, right? He didn't have children yet, and he marries this woman who can't have children. But again, which women who can't have children? The akara and the skena, who both could have had children in the past, but right now can no longer have children. Lo shotava lo notelik ketubah. Again, according to Tanakama, she doesn't drink the Sotah waters because he's not supposed to marry her. Rabbi Elazar omer yacholu lisacheret v'likropa l'bot himena. He could marry someone else in addition to her, and therefore there's no problem at all. He could stay married to her, and therefore he could bring her as a Sotah. Ava. Hey, we're still not on the aylonit yet. Hamikanela arusato. Now, that's the whole first section of the braita. Were all cases where there's no drinking the Sotah waters. However, she loses her ketubah money. Now we're going to go back to the first case, but bring the parallel where it's similar to the first case, but a little bit different, and she would drink the Sotah waters. What would that be? And we're going to go also kind of in order and compare. So when she was betrothed or shomeret yabam, and she did the kinui and the stira during that time period, no. However, what if he warns her when she's only betrothed or waiting to do yibum? We saw this already. And after he marries her, then she goes into the room alone with the man that she was warned about before. She has two options in front of her. She can either drink the Sotah waters to prove her innocence. If she doesn't want to do that, she doesn't have to, but she loses her ketubah and obviously has to divorce her. Okay, now this is interesting. As opposed to someone who marries someone who's pregnant with someone else's child, now we're talking about a man who suspects his wife and she happens to be pregnant or nursing her child. Now, what's the issue here? The issue is if she drinks the Sotah waters, she could die. If she dies, she's putting her child, first of all, if she's pregnant, the baby will die with her. If she's nursing, the baby may die because his mother's gone. So you might have thought that maybe there's no Sotah waters here because we worry about the baby. No. O shota o lo nutelik ketubata. Basic laws of Sotah apply. She's a married woman. Okay, so she has, she's pregnant, she's nursing. We don't care. This woman cheated on her husband. We're going to punish her. Very interesting to think about, right? I don't know if you ever thought about that kind of thing. It's actually a real interesting issue. Harovesh nasa kara uskena. Now we're the parallel case. We have a young man who marries one of these women who can't have children, again, not the aylonit, we'll get back to her. V'yesh lo isha ubanim, but in this case, he already has a wife and children. Okay, maybe he's married, maybe he's not married, but the point is he already fulfilled his mitzvah of having children. So therefore, o Sotah lo notelik ketubah, right? So she, again, drinks the Sotah waters, or if she opts not to, well, then she'll lose her ketubah and obviously has to be divorced from him. Eshet mamzer lemamzer, eshet nitin lenitin, eshet ger ve'evid meshukral. So before we get to the next one, which is sof the one we're looking for, the aylonit, but this means a woman who can marry a mamzer, who marries a mamzer, for example, she herself is a mamzeret. So one of the people who's allowed to marry a mamzer, and she does, or a nitin, one who can marry a nitin and marries a nitin. Right? Those are the people from the Givonim who also can't marry. These are all what we call, right, people who can't marry within the community, regular people. Eshet ger, one who marries a convert. Now that anyone can marry a convert, but we'll see, maybe there's some other issue here why they mention it. And eved mishuchral, or someone who marries a gentile slave who is freed, who actually becomes Jewish. So all those people, the aylonit and the aylonit, this is basically a normal marriage. O Sotah o lo notelik ketubah. Now, the aylonit, we already talked about that, right? It was a problem. Now, what did we say about the aylonit? Even Rabbi Elazar, who holds it in akara or a zkena, can actually drink the Sotah waters, but not the aylonit because of that special drasha from a pasuk. So here we assume this must be Rabbi Elazar, and the aylonit is actually can drink the Sotah waters. O Sotah o lo notelik ketubah, right? So the same thing, she either drinks or she doesn't get her ketubah money. So that's the end of the braita. Katani mia aylonit yufte de Rav Nachman. This goes against Rav Nachman's explanation. If you remember, in our Mishna, we saw Rabbi Elazar disagreed about all three, which would match this braita also. Seems like even in the aylonit, he was disagreeing. Rav Nachman said, no, he wasn't disagreeing about the aylonit. He thinks the aylonit for sure can't drink the Sotah waters because of a special drasha from the pasuk. This braita clearly doesn't put all three. If all three are together and you say Rabbi Elazar disagrees, you could claim he only disagrees about 2 out of 3. But if the aylonit is separate and it says she drinks, and clearly she drinks. So how does Rav Nachman going to explain this? Amar lecha Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman could answer, Tinaihi va'anad amre ki haitan. It's a machloket tanaim. Okay, anytime you bring a braita to contradict or some other tannaitic source, if you can claim that there's a debate among tanaim about it, I hold by this and this holds by a different opinion. So when it comes to the aylonit, there's a debate about what Rabbi Elazar held. Did he hold the simple reading of our Mishnah, aylonit can drink the Sotah waters, or does it go by the braita, which says aylonit can't? Now, even our Mishnah could be explained like the braita. So how can we explain this? Well, where's his Tana that clearly says an aylonit can't drink the Sotah waters? Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, as Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says in this braita, aylonit lo Sotah lo notelik ketubah. Exactly what Rav Nachman said appears in a braita in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So it might not be the typical opinion, the main opinion of the rabbis, but it is an opinion, and Rav Nachman says, I hold by this opinion, and that's why I think that Rabbi Elazar says this, because he's holding like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, right? Misha darka lihizarea, yatzda zo she'ein darka lihizarea. We're going to exclude any woman who can never have had children because of that pasuk. So we basically end, we're not ending yet, but we end this section right now, or at least the resolution of the braita. The braita said the aylonit can drink. Rav Nachman said even the one who says these women can drink because he could always marry somebody else and have children with somebody else doesn't think so with the aylonit because of that special drasha. He holds like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. The braita where it said they can drink the Sotah waters holds by the rabbis. So now what we're left to figure out here is Rabbanan. What do they do with that pasuk? There's an assumption that clearly this means something in addition to the simple reading. Again, the simple reading is you will be blessed if you go through the Sotah process and you're proven innocent, you'll be blessed with children. But there's an assumption that there's something additional going on here. And we're going to bring now 3 ways of darshaning this pasuk. One is the one we saw already, okay? But now we're going to see 2 others. So one is to say the only way you can do the Sotah process is if potentially at some point in your life, you were able to have children. So what does the rabbis do with it? They need it for the following braita. We get into a very interesting debate between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiva says, what does this come to mean? It's adding something additional. Well, it's coming to tell you that if you were a Sotah woman who couldn't have children, and then you went through the Sotah process, and then you were proven innocent, you will now be blessed that you will have children. Okay, you will no longer be childless. So Amar Rabbi Ishmael says, it's absurd what you're suggesting. Why is it absurd? Im ken yisatru kol akarot v'yipakdu v'zohu aylonit sida. You kind of split it into two. He says the following. Then any woman who can't have children, what will she do? She'll cause her husband to be jealous of her. Her husband, maybe they'll even go in with it together, and say, let's do this. She'll go into a room alone with that man, do nothing with him. Basically, there'll be witnesses that saw them go into the room. She'll go through the Sotah process. Okay, a little demeaning, but, if the reward is I'll be cured from my problem, well, this is like, now we have all sorts of modern methods that we try to deal with women who are struggling to have children. This is a totally different approach about how we deal with it. So a little bit of an absurd approach. Let's just become a Sotah, go through the process, and then we'll be rewarded. And not only that, the following. What if we have a nice tsanua, modest woman who's not willing to go through this process? So she's going to suffer and she won't have children, but the woman who went and let's say we didn't do it on purpose, but you just take a typical woman who was schmoozing with other men, went into a room alone with the man that the husband said, nah, we don't exactly look up to this kind of woman. I mean, she in the end was innocent, but wasn't exactly the most appropriate behavior. And we're going to reward that woman compared to a woman who doesn't go schmoozing with other men. And we're going to basically say, oh, so, okay, your problem's not going to get resolved. You're going to still remain without children, but you will reward you. It seems a total absurdity, Rabbi Ishmael says, can't possibly be. So therefore, he says, so what am I going to do with that pasuk? The first one's good. The next ones are going to rub us. This is one of these dapim. Number one, we're going to struggle with some of the politically correct terminology or things that nowadays would never fly, and we're going to have some explicit, all sorts of explicit descriptions of things that might make some people uncomfortable. So, warning for the rest of today's daf. So, number one, if she was yoledet okay, so we're not talking about people who couldn't have children. We're talking about people who struggle during childbirth. Now it will be less painful for them. That's the one option. Nikeva yoledet zcharim. If she only had girl children before, now she'll be blessed with male children. This was always in the Gemara. I told you I was warning you, right? In the Gemara, male children are always considered the better ones to have. Salim yoledet arukim. Short children, you'll now be blessed with taller children. Shchorim yoledet levanim. Darker children, you'll be blessed with lighter children. Okay, again, all of this is a little bit difficult to swallow, but that was the way they spoke in those days and had no issues about being, I don't know how to describe it, but that's just something we have to deal with that comes up in the Gemara. So we have three options, just to review. One is it has to be a woman who at some point could have had children. If not, she's an aylonit, she never reached sign of maturity. We're going to put that woman in a different category. She doesn't drink the Sotah waters. Number two and three all think she could drink the Sotah waters. And we're only going to exclude, again, according to Rabbi Elazar anyway, and we're only going to, with those, they're either going to say a woman who can't have children is going to now be able to have children, or Rabbi Ishmael, who didn't like that approach, Rabbi Akiva's approach, is going to say it means you're blessed in some other way relating to childbirth, okay? Whether it's you'll have better children, you'll have an easier labor, something like that. Now, what we're going to do from here for the next bunch of sections is go back to some cases in the braita, finish up that, then go back to our Mishna and talk about some cases in our Mishna. And the question in each case is going to be the same, which is, This case is very obvious. Why are they telling us this? So we're going to remember the Mishna and the braita are very similar. So I'm going to point out when we're dealing with the braita and then when we're going back to the Mishna. So first, because we quoted this braita, we now want to go in depth a little bit into a few things in the braita and say, isn't this obvious? Why are you saying it? And then they're going to say, well, you would have thought this. This is one of those days of you would have thought many things, and we'll end with no, but it's not the case. So Eshet mamzer lemamzer pshita. Obviously, if a mamzer can marry a mamzeret, let's say, so of course, if they're married and it's a legitimate marriage, then of course he could bring her as a sotah. So what are you telling us? You might have thought we don't want to create a situation where we have more mamzerim in the world because we don't want to have more mamzerim. It just creates all sorts of problems. So you might have thought, okay, they're married, fine, they can get married, they can be married. But if they have a sotah situation, maybe we insist they get divorced and not try to make peace between them and bring them back together through the sotah process. Well, the answer is no, that's not true. We do. Okay, don't worry that we're going to have more mamzerim in the world if they're already married, and we can try to keep them married. Shita. So why would the wife of a ger be any different than anybody else? A ger is a Jew. Why would you think to distinguish? Well, right? A ger is a convert. So converts are Jews once they convert. So you might have thought, well, it says speak to the Jewish people. Maybe why it says Bnei Israel, it's specifically trying to exclude converts. Kamash Malan teaches you no, it's not the case. Bnei Israel does include converts. Okay, so they just wanted to make sure that you didn't think it excluded them. The Gemara says maybe it really is excluding converts. Maybe that's why it shows the language of the sons of Israel, because sons of Israel excludes converts. Well, the Amarta Ribuya. We already saw this, that this is the beginning of the section in Bamidbar, chapter 5 of the Sotah. It says, Daber b'nei Israel ve'amarta alehem. Ve'amarta alehem comes to include something additional. It's coming to include the converts. Eshet kohen shotah. So now that was all a quote. What we did until now were quotes from the braita. Now we're going back to our Mishna. The wife of a kohen drinks. So again, pshita. So what's the difference? If she's married to a kohen, she's married to Israel, of course she should drink the Sotah waters. Ma'u detama, you might have thought, vihilo nitpasa asura, ha nitpasa muteret. Okay, this is a pasuk you might remember. We darshed it in the beginning of the Masechah. We're going to again see it in a few dapim. Vihilo nitpasa is a pasuk that says if she was actually guilty, and there aren't witnesses who saw her, which we explain means, but there was one witness who saw her, and she wasn't raped, then she's guilty, right? If she's raped, ha nitpasa, if she was raped, muteret. The assumption of that pasuk is she would actually be permitted if it wasn't rape. Now, this is the woman who did kinui. He warned her. She went into the room. A witness, at least one witness, saw her, that she had relations with him and saw that she wasn't raped. Vizot. Now, you might say that means, right? So we're doing a sotah process for a woman, right? Either now, in this case, she's not going to go through the sotah process. But since it's talking about this in the Sotah section, and it would be saying if that were the case, right, she would be guilty, obviously, if she wasn't raped. But if she was raped, she wouldn't be guilty. And if we don't know what happened in the room, then she'll go through the Sotah process. But it's all kind of talking about the Sotah. So you might say, you thought it was a little difficult, that whole thing about preferring male children to women children or white children to darker children. This is even more difficult, which is this concept that a woman who's married to a kohen, if she gets raped, she's not permitted to her husband. So this pasuk in the Sotah section implies that if she was raped, she could go back to her husband. So you might say, this Eshet Kohen, Zoho Ilvenit Pasa Asura, this woman, because she was raped, she's actually forbidden to go back to her husband. So Emalo Tishem, maybe the whole Sotah ceremony doesn't relate to her. Kamash Malan, it comes to teach you it does anyway. That doesn't exclude her from the Sotah ceremony. Umuteret Lebala. Now it says the Eshet Kohen drinks, and if she's innocent, she's permitted to her husband, to which they say, again, every sotah who drinks and is innocent is permitted to her husband. So, pshita, this is obvious. So, Amar Rav Huna binit navna. It's talking about, you might remember, we discussed this whole fascinating topic about, do her merits push off her death? So, Rabbi Shimon said, no, they don't push off her death. Okay? Ain't because of no. The whole sotah ceremony is to see, is she going to die right away or not? The rabbis, on the other hand, say it could push off her death. And then we get into this weird situation. It's hard to understand. Nothing really happens to her, and we don't know, is she really innocent or guilty? So she's going to go back to her husband because we assume she's innocent, even though maybe she's got some merits. But Rebbe said, no, we have a way to know. Her body starts to deteriorate immediately, right? And we start to see signs. Now, the assumption here is, what signs do we start to see? Where do we start to see deterioration? Specifically in her stomach, her intestines, and her thighs, because that's what the Torah says. Her stomach's going to explode, her thighs are going to fall. So Rav Huna says, we're talking about she's permitted to her husband in a case where her situation starts to deteriorate. Well, that makes absolutely no sense, because if she starts to deteriorate, we know that she's guilty. And then, of course, she can't go back to her husband. So the Gemara asks me, Navna, habat kwamaya. The waters basically showed she's guilty. How could you possibly say that? So they say, it means that it's not in her stomach, her insides, or her thighs where we see signs. She starts to get headaches, maybe pains in her arms, something else. Now, then they're telling you, if you see signs like that, she has other ailments that start right away, we let her go back to her husband. Now, again, if it's not in her stomach, it's not in her thighs, then of course she goes back to her husband. There's no sotah, so why are you even telling us this? Mao detema, well, you might have thought, very interesting thinking, maybe she really was with that man, slept with him. But the reason why they're not going through her body and doing what they're supposed to be doing in a normal manner, but it's going to her head instead, maybe it was rape. Maybe he raped her. In other words, they're looking at these signs. This is like reading into things a little too much. They're saying, okay, so her body didn't start to deteriorate in the way that a sotah would, but it started to deteriorate some other way right away. So instead of saying it's random, maybe it's a sign from God that this woman was in that room. Something happened in that room, but maybe it was rape. Now remember, she's married to a kohen. So if it's rape, then they couldn't stay married. So ulagabi kohen asira, she'd be forbidden. So if you think that things start happening to this woman, but they're not things that seem to be related to sotah, but you think they maybe are a sign that she was raped, no, we don't go by that. Don't make those assumptions. Kamash Malan, she's allowed to go back to her husband, even if she starts getting headaches and other ailments right away. As long as they're not related to the sotah ailments, then it's fine. Eshet Tarish Shotah. This was the next case in the Mishna. The woman married to a eunuch can drink. Cheetah, isn't it obvious? No, because Ma'u detema mi baladei ishech Amar Rahman. The Torah says she slept with some man in addition to her husband. And we said right before, we said that means they have to be actually married, right, and have relations first. So you might have thought, Hai la barachihu, he's a eunuch, can't have relations with her. Kamash Malan comes to teach you, well, he can actually have relations. It's just that he can't have children. So that doesn't mean that he's not going to be excluded here, because he can actually have relations with her. So therefore, she would drink the sotah waters. Now we're up to the next section of the Mishna. The next section of the Mishna is not dealing with who's the husband and who's the wife, and what's the relationship between them, were they permitted to marry or not permitted to marry, and what were their unique situations like kohen, saris, all that. But we're now jumping to the next part, which is who is the man who she's suspected of being with, and does that matter? Is that a factor? Is it only certain types of people? So al yidei kol arayot mekanim. He can warn her about any kind of man, even if it's a forbidden relationship, even if it's her father, her brother, her son, right? Any of those forbidden relations, he can warn her about them, and she can become a sotah based on that. So the Gemara again says, Pshita, isn't this obvious? Turning now to Amud Bet. Ma'u detema, you might have thought, and we're going to come back to this argument later also. Nitma'a shnei pamim. It mentions this woman becoming impure in two of the psukim. And why is it mentioned twice? Echad labal ve'echad laboel. One is to teach you, if she sleeps with the man and is nitma'a, that's the term again that we use over and over, the Torah is using to say she was with that man and slept with him. One is to forbid her to her husband, and one is to forbid her to the man that she was suspected of being with. So she becomes nitma'a, right? Forbidden to both. Now, what might you infer from here? Why wouldn't this potentially include arayot, forbidden relatives? Because this is coming to teach you, we're finding it's talking about a person who is forbidden to her specifically because of what she just did, as opposed to arayot, who are forbidden to her from before. Maybe we're going to exclude then. It would have to be someone who only becomes forbidden to her because of what she just did. Because she went into the room alone with him. Remember, the classic example is a woman who's married and sleeps with another man, forget about a sotah, right? This is a case where we know for sure she slept with him. She's going, besides she gets the death penalty, but let's say there aren't witnesses enough or whatever. She in general is forbidden to her husband and forbidden to the other person, which she had relations with. That's the typical penalty that she gets. So you might have thought here, because also here we say nitma, nitma 2 times to teach you she's both forbidden to her husband as soon as we suspect her and to the future person. Then we're going to say, only maybe this includes someone who is forbidden specifically because of this action, not someone who was already forbidden. Hamashmalan, that's why the Mishna has to teach you. No, it even includes people who were forbidden to her before. Now we're going to deal with this next section really till the end of today's daf. Chutz mina katan, other than a minor. Now, it said there, Ish amar Rahmana velo katan. Okay, that's easy. This is not really the part we're going to deal with. Why is a minor excluded? Meaning, if the husband is concerned, she went into a room with a minor, that's not a problem. Why? Even though theoretically from age 9, it is considered intercourse with a minor. But Ish amar Rahmana velo katan. The pasuk says, Ish, she was imishkav ishota, if a man sleeps with her, a man, not a minor. Now comes the tricky part. Then it said in the Mishnah, Vishe'eno ish, and one who is not a man. What does this term mean? We're going to have 3 options. And we're going to have a lot of tangents off of this. That's why this is going to take us till the end of the daf, even though theoretically all we have left is 3 options. So Vishe'eno ish, and the tangents are going to be very similar. So you'll kind of get into the flow as we go along. L'miuteman, what does it come to exclude? Ilema, if you want to say, which is always going to be rejected, if you're going to say l'miute shachuf. What's shachuf? It's a person who can't finish an act of intercourse. Okay, he's impotent. So he's not capable of finishing an act of intercourse. You might have thought, no ish, he's not a man, right? People like to say, oh, manly, right? He's not a man because he can't finish an act of intercourse. Well, that can't be. Because it can't be what? That the man can't suspect the woman of being with a man who's in this state. Because Ha'amar Shmuel said, shachuf, mikanim al yado posel b'tchuma. You could be mikaneh your wife about this kind of man. And if you're a woman who's, let's say, a bat kohen, the daughter of a kohen, it disqualifies you from eating truma. Or even if you're a regular woman, okay, now, what does it mean it disqualifies you from having truma? So you need a little more information here. If you have a woman who's a daughter of a kohen, she eats truma until she gets married, or if she has relations with someone who she's not allowed to, like a mamzer, an atin, or one of those people, it disqualifies her forever from eating truma, okay, and from marrying a kohen. Or so she could be a bat kohen, or she could be a regular woman, not a daughter of a kohen, but it will preclude her from in the future if she ever wants to marry a kohen. So and that's just from having relations with one of it would have to be relations with a man who's forbidden to her. If she has relations with a man who's forbidden to her, and he's a shachuf, but he can't actually finish an act of intercourse, it doesn't matter. She's still disqualified from having truma, because the assumption is he can start an act of intercourse, he just can't keep it going. So now they say the following. I told you we get a little graphic here. It'll get even more as we go on. Okay, wait till the end of the daf. So now the Gemara says, so basically the structure is very simple. What is this man she'enu ish? Maybe it's a shachuf, because he's not a man exactly. He is a man, but he can't finish an act of intercourse for this purpose, let's say. So we can't say that because of what Shmuel said. Shmuel said, a man like this, yes, there's kinui. You can warn your wife against being with him, and he would disqualify from truma if he engaged in a sexual act with this woman. Even though he can't finish it, it would still be considered. If, again, he would have to be one of the people who would disqualify her. It's not any man. It would have to be one of those people she can't have relations with. Anyway, comes the Gemara and questions Shmuel. So we're now tangent, because we're not yet back to our sugya. We're going to get back soon and say, what's the second option of Eino Ish, because this one didn't work. And we're going to do the same thing. Bring a statement of someone else who says that's not true. So, but before we move on, we want to ask, Mikanim al yado, why did Shmuel say? Now we're just going to deal with Shmuel's statement. That a shachuf, Mikanim al yado, pshita, isn't that obvious? So they say, no, because ma'u detema, maybe even though he could start intercourse, but since he can't finish it, you would say, it says in the pasuk by Sotah, v'shachav ishota shichvat zera. Shichvat zera means, right, he has relations with her that could theoretically create children. Amar Rahmana, v'halav barhachi, and he can't do that. So kama shmalan, it wasn't so simple. Shmuel had to say it, it's included anyway. Uposel b'truma, that also, pshita, it should be obvious. Why would it not disqualify her? Having relations with anyone, even if it's not full relations, it is somewhat relations with someone, and therefore, right, it is intercourse, it's just not complete intercourse. Obviously, it disqualifies her. So why are you telling us this? Ma'u detema, you might have thought, lo yichalel zo'o ara rachmana. This is actually about the male kohen, but they learn from there to a female kohen who also gets disqualified from being able to marry a kohen, becomes a halala, so to speak. Lo yichalel zo'o ara rachmana di'it le zera lichalel. It would only apply to someone who basically can mess up, can where the relationship can cause a problem with their children. This is a little taking things out of context and kind of switching it from the man to the woman, but this is talking about a kohen. Kohen, it would have to be in a case where there was zera, there was children. Maybe here also, the man that she has relations with that disqualifies her from marrying a kohen might have to be a man that theoretically she could have had children with in that act of intercourse. And since he couldn't finish the act, then they can't have children. So maybe you would exclude him. That's what Shmuel had to say. No, he's not excluded. He can mess her up for marrying a kohen in the future if he engages in an act of intercourse with her. That was an aside, as I said, to deal with Shmuel and explain why, again, our main questions today are all, isn't that obvious? Why are you telling us something obvious? Next. So now we're back to what does it mean, Eino Ish, that if you warn your wife not to be in a room alone with this man, it's not considered a Sotah situation. Maybe it comes to exclude Gentiles, that if he warns her not to go into a room alone with a Gentile, he's worried she's cheating on him with some non-Jew, maybe that would be excluded, to which they're going to say, no way, no how. Of course, why would you think to exclude that? She's cheating on him. What's the difference if she's cheating on him with a Jewish person or a non-Jewish person? Didn't Rav Hamnuna say, Ovei kochavim mekanim al yado posel b'truma? Same thing. An Ovei kochavim would basically, you can do kinui about him, and posel b'truma. And if he sleeps with this bat kohen, if she sleeps with a Gentile, she can no longer eat truma for the rest of her life. A Jewish, regular Israel woman who sleeps with a Gentile can't marry a kohen in the future. So, right, or would exclude her also from truma if she were to marry a kohen. Okay, she's not really allowed to marry a kohen. Anyway, mekanim al yado. So now the Gemara says, mekanim al yado, shita. Okay, so now, what do you mean, mikanim al yado? Why are you telling us this? Isn't it obvious that you could do kinui? We're now going back to the same, we're leaving our sugya again, dealing with just what Rav Hamnuna said. We're going to ask the same questions we asked on Shmuel's statement when he said it about the shachuf. Now we're going to ask it about the man who was impotent. Now we're going to ask it about the ovei kochavim, the Gentile. So the Gemara says, pshita, isn't that obvious? Well, ma'u detema, again, we're going to go back to an argument we saw at the very beginning of this amud, this page. In the Sotah ceremony section, it says 2 times nitma to teach you nitma to her husband and nitma to her person she slept with now. You might have thought it's only kinui would only be when she's forbidden with this issue of znut. But she was forbidden anyway to sleep with this Gentile even before this. And not because she now was warned. Therefore, Emalo, you might have thought, maybe he's not included. Kamashwan, he's included anyway. Uposel b'truma pshita, isn't it obvious he's going to disqualify her from eating truma if he has relations with her? Well, ma'u detema, you might have thought, the section that talks about this is bat kohen kitieli ishsal. When does she leave eating truma, bat kohen? When she goes and marries a stranger. A stranger means a non-kohen. Yisrael or a Levi. I'm a Rahmana, but what does it say? Kitiyeh is the language of marriage. To bar havaya'in, to love bar havayalo, it would have to be someone who potentially she could marry. Now, if she marries a Gentile, we say ein kiddushin topsin. There is no betrothal. It's as if she's not betrothed at all. We don't view her as a betrothed woman because there's no such thing as marriage to a Gentile within Judaism. So, kamashman de pasil. Therefore, he had to tell you she is disqualified from eating truma, even though the language of the pasuk, which describes the daughter of a kohen who has to stop eating truma, would only be when she's with an ishzar, not only in a case of marriage, even in a case where there isn't marriage. Where do we learn this from? Because the pasuk does really seem to imply only when there could be betrothal or marriage. Mida Rabbi Yochanan. He learns it from Rabbi Yochanan that it does disqualify her from truma. Da Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. Yochanan quotes Rabbi Yishmael as saying, Minayin lovei kochavim ve'eved shebao ala kohenet v'ala leviyah v'abat Yisrael shepsalua. Here you have it explicitly. A Gentile or a Canaanite slave who has a sexual relationship with whether she's a daughter of a kohen, a daughter of a Levi, or a daughter of a Yisrael, they will disqualify her from eating truma. Shene'emal, we learn it from this pasuk. Ubat kohen ki tieh almanal gulsha. Now we're talking about the pasuk when the bat kohen gets to go back to eat truma. When is that? If she becomes divorced or widowed. Now in this relationship, it's only right. She can't be divorced or widowed from them because she can't marry them in the first place. So mishi yesh lo amanut v'gerushim ba. Only if there's marriage or divorce can she go back to eating truma. Yatsu ovei kochavim ve'eved. This comes to exclude the ovei kochavim and the eved she'en lo amanut v'gerushim ba. There is no widowing from a relationship with them because they're never considered. She's never considered their wife. There's no divorce because she's never considered their wife. Therefore, she can never go back to eating truma. Ve'ela. Okay, so that was an aside again. We went in both times. We brought a suggestion. What an Eino Ish is. We rejected it because of a statement of either Shmuel in the first case and Rav Hamnuna in the second. Both those cases, they both said the same thing. That person, you can do kinui, and they disqualify for truma. Each time we said, why you have to tell us this? It's obvious. And each time they said why they had to tell us, right? It was four things. The shachuf, why there is kinui, and why is disqualified for truma. He disqualifies her from eating truma. In both cases, we had to say why it wasn't obvious and why it said it, and why in the end they said, right, that this is the law. Now we're going to finally get to our answer. What is this Eino Ish? Not a man, but an animal. He's worried she's going into a room alone with an animal to engage in bestiality and sexual relations with an animal. That is not a sotah. Okay, that makes more sense. Because that's not called licentious behavior, znut. Okay, how do we know this? Where do we get it from? This means you can't bring a gift given to a prostitute, can't be brought, let's say you brought the prostitute an animal, you can't bring that to the temple and offer it as a sacrifice, because that's despicable. Mechir kelev, if you sold a dog for an animal, you can't bring that animal as a sacrifice. That's despicable, okay? Because dogs were seen as very low, terrible animals for whatever reason, and they didn't like dogs, so they said, right, Mechir kelev, this is a pasuk in the Torah. Now, what does this have to do with animals and znut? We're going to get there in a second. Vitanya, right? Mechir kelev just means you sold your dog for a lamb, and now you want to bring that lamb as a sacrifice. Can't do that. Vitanya, the braita says on this, etnan kelev mechir zonah mutarim, but switch the wording. If you flip it and say the etnan goes with the kelev and the mechir goes with the zonah, meaning, okay, etnan kelev mechir zonah mutarim, how do we get first that they're permitted, and then we'll explain what they are? Shene'emar, in the pasuk it says gam shnehem, also the two of them. Why the two of them? To tell you two and not four, that there's only two permutations here and not four permutations, that we don't do a crossover of both. So now what would be an etnan kelev? Rashi says it's when you give money to a prostitute or give an animal to a prostitute and say, engage in relations with this dog, okay? So that's not prostitution. So that you could, if you actually, not that I would recommend doing this, but if you gave someone money to have relations with a dog, that animal could be brought to the temple, okay? Because that's not considered prostitution or znut, however we would call znut, right? Generally we say prostitution, more probably licentious behavior. And mechir zonah means if you sell a prostitute, like in the slave market, that money that you sold her with, that's different. It's still, again, none of this is we're not saying you should go do this, but it's not included in that verse. Now we have one last thing to deal with where we're going to get more graphic, which is if you go back to that shachuf pasuk, okay, there was something we didn't really resolve, which is we said you could be mekaneh al yidei shachuf, but what's the problem? Meaning, right, he could be the man that the woman suspected and goes to become sotah. But what about that pasuk, asher shachav itash shichvat zera, right? It says he has to sleep with her where there's semen going on here. Now because he doesn't finish the act of intercourse, there is no semen here going into her body. So elas shichvat zera lali. What do we do with that verse shichvat zera? According to this opinion that the shachuf is would be in part of the kinui. You could suspect her. So we're going to have three answers. Number 2 and number 3 in the end are going to both work in some way. But number 1 is going to be rejected. We need it for this braita that says, actually, this isn't even the first answer. This is the answer, but we're going to have 3 explanations of it. Shichvat zera prat ledavar acher. Shichvat zera comes to exclude something else. Okay, that didn't really help us. What is something else? My davar achel. Rav Sheshet. So first answer is, he warned her going into this room alone with a man and engaging in anal intercourse. Okay, that's bia shelo kedarka. That is what he warned her for. That wouldn't be a sotah, to which the Gemara says, Amalei Rava says, shelo kedarka. How could you possibly say that's not a sotah? Mishkevei isha, when it comes to all the forbidden relationships, it says mishkevei isha in plural, ways of sleeping with women, which seems to include, right, which seems to include both regular intercourse and anal intercourse. So therefore, both of those are included and both would be a problem. So answer number 2, Elamarava, it's where he said, don't go into a room alone with this man and sit with your bodies close together, right? And have physical contact, but not, he doesn't say relations. So that would be excluded. So Amarle Abaye, Pritsuta Balmahu, Pritsuta Miyasa Rahmana. Why would the Torah even need, you don't need to exclude that. That's just stam pritsut. Now, don't take this lightly, but it's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about actually engaging in intercourse, and this is not intercourse. So, Ela Amar Abaye, option number 3, he warned her about nishika. Now, nishika normally in Hebrew means kissing. Here it doesn't mean kissing. It means that his private part touches her private part without going inside. Okay, I told you graphic. We're going to get graphic. So, this all depends on how you define these terms. There's all these terms in the Gemara, and they're very vague because they didn't really want to talk about things explicitly, but then there become these explicit discussions about what did they mean by this. And it becomes important because there's all sorts of halakha related. So if you say the word ha'ara'a means going inside, nishika means lav klum, just touching but not doing more than that, then that works perfectly. Then the pasuk comes to say, if he warned her about not doing nishika with this man, that would be excluded. Because that's close to having intercourse, but not actually intercourse. But, which is more than derech evalim, as we said. But lemanda amar ha'ara'a zo nishika ma'ikal memar. But those who define ha'ara'a as nishika, and then nishika would be even less, then what would it be coming to exclude? That's not intercourse at all. It's not even close. So they're going to explain now, go back to option number 2 and say, la'olam l'shekine la derech evalim. It is coming to exclude derech evalim. Now, you might say, okay, their bodies touching isn't intercourse, so why would we even need to exclude it? Why? Because, last line for today, ma'u detema bikpeda de baal talya rachmana. Maybe the Torah is all doing this based on what bothers the husband. It would bother the husband if his wife was physically touching another man and they were touching each other's bodies. That would bother her husband. And maybe that's what the Torah meant here. Anything that would bother her husband, not only intercourse. Ubal hakakapit, and this obviously bothers him. Kamashmalan. That's why the pasuk had to exclude it and say, no. Just things like that, that's not included in the sotah. Again, not to say this is, we want you to do this, but if the husband's concerned that that's what his wife is doing with this other man, that we're not going to have him have her go through the whole sotah process. And that's what it's coming to exclude. So we have 3 options here. 2 of them are possibilities. Either it means nishika or it means derech evalim. Okay, so quick review of the daf. What we really did was we brought this braita as a question of Rav Nachman's and explanation of Rabbi Elazar about the aylonit. From that, we went in detail into a few of the cases and said, why they've been telling us this, isn't it obvious? Then we went back to the Mishna and did it with all those other cases in the Mishna. Why are these cases mentioned? It's very obvious. We talked about both who the person is, the husband and the wife, and what their relationship is, and also who the character of who we're doing kinui with. And then we excluded this eno ish. We had 3 options of what eno ish is till we finally concluded it means an animal. Then we proved why an animal is not znut. And then we went to this last thing in mentioning that thing about the shechut. We wanted to deal with how do you explain shechat zera according to that, and what is it coming to exclude? And then we said, right, we had 3 answers, but in the end we were left with 2 possibilities about what shechat zera comes to exclude in the Sotah ceremony. Okay, with that, done with our very explicit daf, and we'll end here for today. Wishing everyone a great day.